particularly in the mobile space. I mean, and it isn't because I work for Microsoft, but I genuinely struggle to be able to say to anybody that they should be using Android for anything that's particularly sensitive, because you have to use a third-party encryption or protection layer on top of it. So, yeah, we have quite a differentiation between ourselves in that space. The interesting thing is, although we would argue that, I'm not sure if you went to sort of most members of the public and say how important is it to them. Don't know.
No, because they don't know. But if we explain to them, yeah, and there are several authors who already try to explain, yeah, I think that can be really some breakthrough, yeah. So, for example, you see this Google Glasses, they're perfect to for example, to kidnap children. It's horrible, you see. I can explain why. So they completely ignore things. But maybe who here in Edinburgh does somebody work on such kind of problems?
Not really. The Edinburgh. I live in Edinburgh, but I have a global role for the company. The Microsoft team in Scotland are very much sales and services people. So our main European research centre is in Cambridge, and we have research centres in Munich and Tel Aviv and Cairo. And then obviously in other parts of the world as well, but there are European centres. So the research on those areas tends to be done through Microsoft Research.
And what is your main interest in work?
My personal, well, I'm in our global cybersecurity group, so I spend a lot of my time advising mostly governments, but some enterprises and.
I think we're actually okay. I'm on the Android now, and it works perfectly. Yeah. Okay. Are you?
That's almost the least of their problems, because most hospitals don't actually have the basics in place in terms of security as well. So there's a whole range of challenges.
Where's my Microsoft phone?
Where am I sitting? What am I doing?
Oh,
Are you in charge?
Naturally, I'm just sitting just in this house.
Chairman.
Log in this
So you don't need me then? Oh,
Yeah.
what do you need me for?
Just okay. Two things. When that gets to, can you see it's like 6%? When it gets to about 2, plug it in. There's
Well,
a
I'll plug it in now.
There's a temporary. It's a brand new phone. In order to restore the battery, we want a full charge and then a full discharge. Yeah, and that's why I prefer not to be using that phone.
Right, so where is it telling me what the percent charge is?
Just forget it. We've got to go. Forget that.
Well, if you can...
Don't worry. Oh yeah. Are you good?
Yep.
All right.
Right, what am I doing?
Nothing at all. Just okay, guys. I think we're finally in a position to get started. Apologies, everyone, on Periscope, on YouTube. We just had a few technical glitches with regards to connectivity, but it's all sorted now. Trying to get a 4G reliable connection is not always easy, as we discovered in central Edinburgh. So the theme of today is security and privacy, or is it privacy and security? But one of the two. Both topics will be covered. I think it's very topical right now with the Internet of Things, as more and more devices become connected to the internet, everything from domestic appliances all the way through to heavy industry. There are benefits in terms of an increase in convenience for consumers and productivity and efficiency in industry. But the dark side, there always seems to be a yin and yang, a plus and minus with technology. The downside is the more access, the more data that's being shared, the more vulnerable we all become. And right now, the trend seems to be, just fire and forget, ship, and you're done. As far as particularly early stage businesses are concerned that are entering through successful Kickstarter campaigns or Indiegogo campaigns. They get access to funding. They're producing usually connected devices for the smart home and wearables that are aimed at consumers. And budget is the key issue before security. And they've got so many other things to worry about. And trying to deal with the security issues is often not their priority. And so a lot of products are being shipped that are vulnerable and may potentially lead to different issues. Now, we've heard all the horror stories from baby monitors that are easily hacked through to thermostats in the home where data can be accessed. It's a backdoor into the smart home, and industry, of course, connecting industrial assets that are strategically important could be a big target for nefarious forces, shall we say. So we've got three fantastic speakers today. The first is a security expert from Microsoft, and his name is Robert Hayes, and we're very fortunate to have him here today. And the second is Roger Whiteley from Fujitsu, who is, I would say, a self-proclaimed geek stroke hacker stroke maker. He's one of these guys, he's very hands-on, and he's going to get his hands dirty with regards to some of the technical issues of dealing and interacting with connected devices. And then the third speaker, who's not here with us today, he's actually going to be speaking to us via Skype from Oxford, is a security expert called David Rogers from Copperhorse Solutions. So then we'll do a Q&A panel, the usual format and discussion topic, Q&A, and we'll hopefully finish with some networking and drinks. So, first presenter, Bob, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All set to go? Fantastic. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, I hate being introduced as a security expert because there's nothing worse than raising the expectations of your audience only to dash them dreadfully shortly afterwards. my academic qualification's actually in psychology, not in computer science, just to lower your expectations. What I want to try and do during this short burst is to talk a little bit about the Internet of Things and security from our perspective. I'm not here to try and persuade you our perspective is the best, but actually probably to show you which way the industry is going and actually what that might mean for some of you. Just for my benefit, how many people here are either in the development or manufacture or researching around the Internet of Things? So how many people, okay, that's about 60, 75%. Okay, that's really good. Because at the end, I do actually want to try and induce some of you to actually come and develop on our platform. And I'll talk a little bit about why at the end. So, let's talk a little bit about why the Internet of Things changes the way that we need to think about security. And this will not be new to you. But it is new to a lot of the organizations you will deal with. For my role in the company, I spend much of my time talking to governments around the world, but increasingly enterprises in all sectors, about what they need to do to change their business to capture new business and do it securely. And what I'd say to you is, in almost every sector, organizations are 1,000 miles away in security terms from where they need to be. And it isn't a technology issue, because actually, if you go to the chief executive of a bank or a hospital and you ask them what's on their mind, security is now one of the first things that comes up. So you have to sort of say to yourself, so if everybody knows what the problem is, and actually most people have got a realistic idea about what the answer to that problem is, because things like the UK government's 10 steps to cybersecurity, just been updated, but that's been around, what, 3 years now? And you know, if you follow that as an organization, big or small, the reality is you'll mitigate an awful lot of the threats against your organization. So why isn't it happening? And you sort of have to think about, it's because of the change management aspects of it. So a lot of organizations built a security model around the way they started to do business. I would say when I go to look at a government in particular, I can usually tell what the IT security model of an organization is by looking at the way the building is built. The bigger the fences, the more armed guards there are outside a building, you can pretty well guarantee that the computer and IT security model will be based upon a whacking great firewall, and then keep your fingers crossed and hope that nobody ever gets through it. And actually, the Internet of Things changes that. Yet most organizations don't even realize they're part of it. Hospitals now, you look at things like blood transfusion meters, you look at oscilloscopes in research labs, they're all connected to the internet or to networks internally in organizations. Yet, very, very rarely is there any level of security either on those devices or on the network. They've sort of fallen into the Internet of Things by accident. Hey, we've got acrobatics going on at the same time. I'm very impressed, Simon. So the security model of most organizations, whether they realize it or not, is actually redundant. The world has moved on, but the security architecture of organizations hasn't. Very few organizations have any form of intrusion detection, network monitoring. Very few organizations know what's normal on their network. And if you don't know what's normal on the network, it's incredibly difficult to know when you've been compromised or whether somebody's penetrated you. So the idea that the firewall is the all-protecting thing has long gone. But at the same time, banks want people to be able to bank using smartphones. They want people to be able to pay using things like my Microsoft Band or an Apple Watch. And increasingly, the idea of business is that business is done on a myriad of devices. Even governments want to get people to report crimes over mobile phones through data links. So the security model, even if it exists, is riddled with holes all the way through. And as Simon said at the beginning, when you start really to think about what the Internet of Things comprises, and you can look at Gartner or Forrester, and you will get figures about by 2020, there will be 40 billion, 50 billion, I don't know how many there'll be. There are going to be a lot of devices, a lot more than there are now. Just looking around this room, it's really interesting because we've got controllers that took a while to fiddle with that lower the screen. We have lighting controllers. We have all sorts of interesting embedded systems just in this room that are all linked into systematically into something somewhere that may or may not have a back end with some security in it or not. So where do we go with this? Because this impacts on privacy too. And you can't talk about security without thinking about the privacy implications of it. And data and privacy are becoming more important. So if you want to do business and your security is poor, you may not be able to do business because your privacy implication. And interestingly, is the baseline deployments when you come to talk about the Internet of Things is pretty poor. There are a number of reasons why security isn't built into the Internet of Things devices. First is no one ever thought about it till about 3 or 4 years ago, so it just wasn't actually on the agenda. The second is if I'm developing something that makes my vacuum cleaner connected to the internet, what's the acceptable margin in manufacturing costs for that connectivity? If you're talking about £100 for a vacuum, perhaps 105, 110 for a connected vacuum. So the costs you've got to actually build something in security are very, very limited. And if you're talking about a $10 device, then actually the security margin that's going to be acceptable, frankly, isn't going to exist. So it becomes a real issue about the devices themselves. The second is a lot of devices, the embedded systems in this room, they're designed that you put them into the building, you put them into the factory, and you leave them. And 20 years' time, you'll go back and you'll change it, and that will be the only maintenance you will ever do on that. So the idea about how you update that, how you patch that, that was never in the operating environment for the design of those. And we are lumbered with millions of devices out there that are probably running on 30-year-old software and hardware that will be there for another 10 or 15 years yet in every sector that you talk about. There is no real security standard when we talk about this. Actually, there's too many security standards, but none of them are used universally. And many of, particularly when you talk at the consumer level, when I go and talk to people who develop IoT, and I come to places like this, and I see people who are doing it, how do they get the software? They often will go to Google Store or somewhere and download software kits. And they'll put the software kits together with a bit of hardware and you've got an IoT device. The problem is there is awful lot of malware in many of the publicly available software kits. We know it, most people know it, but the problem is that people are still using them and there's almost no control on that. Now, all of that sort of makes life a bit challenging, but there is a case for thinking about the developing. I'd sort of say have a think about this. Certainly governments, if you look at the UK government as an example, there are 3 schemes in the UK government, all of which are around minimum standards of security if you want to be either engaged or a supply chain for the UK government. Enterprises, companies like us, we are really careful about who goes into our supply chain. And increasingly, you are going to see legislation and regulation, meaning that if you want to do business, you're going to have to prove your security credentials. And that will be at the level of device or network. So there are some economic cases, even at the consumer space, Windows 10 for us and increasingly other companies' operating systems are going to be more geared to a lockdown environment where you're going to need to have permission from the operating system to operate whatever it is. And if you're not an accredited device, you probably won't get it. So moving forward, there's going to be an impact on people who are developing in this space. If you don't have a level of security, you probably find your market will decrease. And the days of the Wild West in the app stores where you could just build something and stuck it out there and people will download it or buy a $2 device, you'll probably find those days will go. So let's just do a very simple deconstruction. And I apologize, but with this audience, this will not be new information to you. There are 3 bits to securing the Internet of Things. The first is we have the ubiquitous connected sensors and devices with a little bit of software on them. The second is you have the network that you need to secure and the back end, which is the cloud joined services, aggregating data and actually making these devices come to life. And if you want a security model that's coherent, it's actually got to be coherent over all 3 of those. And there's a bit of a problem, because that first one, that's really difficult. So if you sort of work on the basis that we have legacy devices out there that are going to be there for years to come, that the marginal cost of introducing good quality security into devices is going to be pervasive for the foreseeable future, and we don't really have security standards on the devices, thinking that your security strategy is going to be based at the device end is probably not going to get you very far. That doesn't mean that designers shouldn't design it in. And one of the things I would say is I'm staggered by how many little devices that I look at that find they're actually not just transmitting, but they're actually listening for unsolicited traffic. So what you have with some of these $2, $3 devices is they're little servers, but they're little servers without any security in them whatsoever. And that's something that could be designed out. So the second part is, so if you're not going to secure the device, where are you going to put your security to try to do this? And what I want to do next is sort of just show you our approach to this. And again, I emphasize, I'm not here to sell you our way of doing things, but you'll probably find that what you see here will be mirrored by the other large manufacturers, because frankly, there really isn't much of another alternative. So with us, it's around Azure and our Internet of Suite things. And I genuinely do apologize. I hate doing stuff that talks about products, but there's no really better way to talk about our approach than saying what we're doing here on it. So basically, we have an Internet of Things suite that is our connected part of this. And the idea of the IoT suite is you can link up literally millions of devices to a hub within your network, and it will create a registry. And effectively, it will register all of those devices, and I'll talk in a little bit about what type of devices it will register. And then we'll process that data to predict trends and do the stuff that people want with device data. And the security side of that comes with what we're calling the Internet of Things hub. And this is the bit where the hub will sit, if you like, between all of the devices that you're listening to and the back-end network. So as opposed to try to secure the devices, effectively what this becomes is a gateway to your devices. So you're really sort of saying, well, if I don't trust you, device, you can set by policy, depending on the type of organization you are, what that happens, whether that means you won't be able to allow that device to communicate, or perhaps you quarantine or sandbox the device until you're happy with it. But the principle is it will not allow insecure connections. Now, there's obviously a bit of an issue here, because remember what I said about all the legacy devices? So what are you going to do with these devices that are out there that, frankly, we know aren't going to be secure? They're in untrusted environments. Even if they were secure when they put out there, who's to say I didn't come in last night with my screwdriver and change that device that's on that pillar that controls the way the screen goes up and down? Because if that is connected in some way to your back-end network, that actually could be the attack vector route in. And if you look at some of the major attacks over the last couple of years, people are looking increasingly and actually very creatively about where you can attack vector into an organization. So we're seeing far more attacks now that are vectored in through third-party organizations where the security environment is weaker. So this enables a federated identity, but there's obviously a sort of back end to it, which is that actually we're looking for people to start to develop applications and devices that we can actually accredit. And it doesn't have to be for a Microsoft platform. We're producing this for multiple platforms. The idea is it's a common set of standards. And if you produce your device to that set of standards, then our back end and hopefully other people's back ends will recognize those devices in the future as trusted and facilitate bidirectional communication between them. Now, I suspect, looking at what our partners and competitors are doing in this space, it's very much along the same lines. So the key thing for us is we are looking to try and get people, particularly people who are looking at hardware, developing hardware, to actually come on. We're supporting people. So if you are a hardware developer and you're interested in this, the website's down at the bottom, talks about the support we give to people to develop hardware in this space. So to conclude, the bottom line is there is a huge appetite in business for the Internet of Things because it is genuinely transformational. If you look in the health sector, just in the health sector, and look at the connected medical devices that will enable people to be monitored in their homes as opposed to hospitals, the cost saving and the impact on people's personal health and their personal well-being is very, very difficult to quantify, but significant. But each of those devices is linked back into a hospital or a doctor's system. It has to be, that's the whole point of it. So if you can't secure this, you have the danger of those devices actually either corrupting data or worse, in some cases looking at the destruction of data through those attack vectors. So there's a real need to move forward on this and to take notice of those legacy devices. So that's our approach to it. We think that industry will be going in that direction, and we're really keen to get developers on board. I think, Simon, you're taking questions at the end of the 3 sessions?
Yeah, we're doing a panel Q&A at the end.
Good.
So if that's you wrapped up.
That's me wrapped up, and I will...
Fantastic, thank you so much, Bob. Round of applause, thank you. Excellent, so what we're going to do now is just change over to our next speaker.
Good. Are we going to swap the mic?
Yeah, can do. I'm not even sure it's on, is it?
I don't know. We probably can't hear it in here. I think it's
it's good.
for the benefit of the benefit of the live stream.
Absolutely.
I'm going to put that where it isn't going to come harakiri again.
So next speaker is Roger Whiteley, who I introduced earlier. Roger's actually a regular to our meetup. So over the months that I've been organising this meetup, we built a really good rapport, and so he keeps me up to date with some of the projects that he's involved with, and I've been quite sort of fascinated from as a non-technical individual to hear about some of the stuff that he gets involved with on a day-to-day basis, and actually some of the things that Fujitsu as an organisation are doing in the space. Mostly, I would say, in the IoT industrial / enterprise rather than consumer space. The connected cow, for example, which Roger will tell you about in a moment, and also helping logistics companies with smart vans to enable their engineers to exchange data more effectively. So what I did want to mention is our sponsor. So Dr. Tim Willis, do you want to have a quick say about your organisation, but Tim essentially is paying for the snacks and the drinks for the meetups. So over to you very quickly. A little plug for our sponsor.
So we're an Edinburgh startup. We do text input font. Am I in? Sure. So we're an Edinburgh startup. We do word prediction.
A little bit more. A little bit more. A little bit more. Up. You're right. A bit more. Okay, go.
So I put up with this every day because I work with it.
I've actually cut your head off on the live stream.
Probably
That's
for the
fine.
best.
Carry on.
So, yeah. So if you know anybody with a wearable, with an Android Wear smartwatch, please get them to download our app. It's called Tusi, T-U-S-I. Please share it with other people and give us your feedback, because it's a very early beta version at the moment, but it's for entering text for messaging, mainly for messaging, and
Okay,
in the future
that'll
for
do.
other things.
Don't
Yes,
go
Tusi,
overboard.
please download
You've
it.
got your airtime now. Roger.
There's also Product Forge.
So X marks the spot. Does it just about here? We
That
should have
will
some
do
tape on the.
nicely.
We should
You're
have
right
some
in
tape
shot
on the
for
floor.
Periscope, for the YouTube live feed. Alan, you're good.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Simon. Now, it was my idea, the last, I think, IoT meeting, but one that we covered security, because it's actually something pretty close to my heart. Now, I've been doing. He put my biog up on. He asked for my biog earlier, and I said, you know, hacker geek, but I've been doing this stuff for 30 years. And one of the first things I did was supervisory control and data acquisition systems. That's SCADA for short. Now, nobody in his right mind would connect a SCADA system that controls a nuclear reactor up to the internet, but they do in the States without a firewall. So, thank you very much, Simon. And I would absolutely concur with Bob, and he's teed up some of the things I'm going to talk about perfectly. So, attack vectors, tick. A few other things as well. I work for Fujitsu. I've been there for 10 years. I'm a distinguished engineer. That just means that I've got quite a lot of grey hair. So it's platinum. So moving swiftly on, I'm not here to plug anything, but most of you'll think, oh, what do Fujitsu do? So I'm going to cover that very briefly. This year we're actually celebrating our 80th anniversary, and we do lots of things, and we don't make cameras. So we don't make cameras. This year we've been named as Responsible Business of the Year for business in the community. We have a corporate relationship with Action for Children. That's all over the UK, and there's a separate one in Northern Ireland. And we're Stonewall top 100 employers for this year. Now, what I have got, and see if I can work this, is this is the only bit of the shameless plug, and I'm hoping that I can see this. Yes, keep going. Right, so, but I did clear this with.
Foundation in 1935. Fujitsu has pursued innovation, striving for a better tomorrow. In the 1950s, we saw the growing possibilities of computers and began to create our own computer technology. And as our reputation for high quality continued to spread throughout the 1970s and 80s, our telecommunications and computer business grew rapidly. And when we introduced the world's fastest supercomputer in 2011, we helped advance human understanding across the world. From day one, our success as a company at every step along the way has come from the strength of our relationships. And as the world becomes ever more digital, we understand that no matter what, people will always come first. We are Fujitsu. Together, we are shaping tomorrow with you.
Thank you for your indulgence. So, let's see if I can find the rest of it. Here we go. So that was. Sorry.
Very interesting, that video that was just queuing up there.
I think it's auto playing the other one, isn't it?
All right. So we'll kill that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that fascinate me. Oh, for goodness sake. Yeah, I know. And what I could do with doing is that. Perfect. So one of the things that we've got quite a background in security. We have a security operations centre in the UK. And if you Google Drydex, you will find that it was a really serious banking hack. And it was the guys in our security operations centre that actually gave the government the right information in order to be able to nail it. So it is relevant, and so security is really important. And in a past life, I was responsible for the internet security of a large aerospace manufacturer who shall remain nameless, and it consisted of an awful lot more than a firewall. That's all I'm going to say on that. So this is I've borrowed some slides from a colleague. So this is talking about a smart city, and if you look at some of the activities in data mining, it gets very interesting because you could do some very, very useful stuff if you've got a crowdsourced set of accelerometers from a phone. You can actually do pothole tracking. I'm just waiting for the chuckle because, of course, Edinburgh is legendary for its potholes. So connected infrastructure. Simon mentioned the van. Now this van is touring around, and I'm going to show a picture in a moment of a van that looks just a little bit like this, and you might, if it's in the right order, where is it? I'm going to skip to the picture because it's actually quite useful. No, right, okay, give up. We'll find it later. I must have rearranged the slides, and it was quite difficult setting it up. So.
It was actually the first one you had it on.
Was it?
Yeah.
That one? Oh, I've got a much better picture than that.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, much better picture of that. So it'll appear at some point in the future. And it was a colleague, and he put a photograph of his van on Sky, and in the background was the old man of store covered in snow. It's absolutely fantastic. But that's a real practical problem, because if you get as far as the northern edge of Skye, data networks really aren't up to much unless you're really lucky. So Bob mentioned attack vectors. If you own a Range Rover in London, they actually recommend you buy a crook lock. And the reason they do that is because there are people floating about with jammers that actually stop you locking your car remotely. And I saw Bob nodding. So that's, these things are actually quite serious. So I'm going to talk a little bit about devices and networks. Networks is where I spent a lot of my time. Supervisory control and data acquisition, things that have to tolerate quite unpleasant industrial electrical noise and heat and all that kind of thing. And very often it's people. So Bob was talking about where's the perimeter, and perimeter security is actually practically impossible when your device, the endpoint is your mobile phone or your smart band or anything like that. So it gets quite hard. Now I have brought a couple of bits of real technology with me that I'm going to use to build a proper home control system. And it's actually really difficult, because if you go and look in the marketplace, there are loads of vendors selling connected hub this, connected hub that, technology to do this, and none of them are interoperable. So it actually gets quite... So the Internet of Things, is it all good? Now I quite like this slide. There's a couple of cracking slides that I've acquired from a colleague when I put a call out. So anybody recognise that? That's a Google car. It's great design. And as somebody who likes engineering and design, that really don't cut it for me. So remember the Jeep? That was an attack vector. So they had to recall a load of vehicles because there was a slight problem with them. You could actually make them stop remotely, which is a bit scary. I had an engineer from Jaguar Land Rover sitting in my car last year, and she said the safety case for the control system in the car was quite extraordinary. So the safety case is a big pile of documentation. So cars are not allowed on the road when they've got a load of electronics in, unless they've actually documented everything and tested it to death. So it's really, so the IoT is almost dangerous in principle, and Google have said that most of the accidents caused by their car have been human error rather than the vehicle. But I think might have been one or two recently. But put that to so the Samsung TV, you enable the voice activation and it records everything and plays it out onto the internet. So that's not a lot of fun. I quite like the picture though. The IoT, as Bob said, totally reliant on networks, and this is just a short list, and I know I'm pretty much standing in front of it. LoRaWAN, that's low energy radio, Bluetooth, BLE, Zigbee, 3, 4, 5 generation, mobile and 5 generations coming. LDP 433 megahertz, Z-Wave and passive Wi-Fi. If you haven't seen passive Wi-Fi, that's actually quite interesting, because it's devices that are getting energy from the Wi-Fi in order to activate, so they don't actually need a battery. And one of the things I brought along with me, apart from a Raspberry Pi, and you've probably seen one of those in the past, is a little 433 megahertz operated switch. As I sat down and thought about the security for my own home network, when I put this thing powered by a Raspberry Pi and some code that you can practically pick off, it's all written in Python, you can pick it off the network really easily. I thought, well, that's all right, because I'm going to sit that behind my firewall. Yeah, and then I thought, hang on, what about jamming? Yeah, somebody just wanders along with a jammer. If you can jam the Land Rover, you can sure as heck jam 433 megahertz. So you really have to be very careful about your product selection and how you design a control system to tolerate somebody jamming it or trying to hijack it or impersonate. So it gets really, really quite difficult, and it takes a lot of thinking about. My particular favourite is the one at the bottom, because that's a lot more difficult to hack. Yeah, that requires physical access, as Bob said, to the control. And physical controls, you go visit a seriously big data centre, and the physical controls are something else. They really are. And having spent 6 hours in one a couple of weeks ago, I know exactly what it's like. So I don't know if anybody picked this up. There was a hotel control system, a blog. This chap had visited a hotel in London, and it had got Android tablet controlled systems for the lights and all sorts of things. And one of them was built into the wall. That was fine. But two of them had got an RJ45 cable. So he thought, oh, that looks interesting. What can I do with that? And he found out it was running Modbus over TCP. And if you don't know what Modbus is, it's an industrial protocol for programmable logic controllers. And I spent 6 weeks writing a piece of code to do that about 25 years ago. It was written in C. So there's no substitute for a risk assessment, which goes back to what Bob was saying. And trust. Trust is really important. One of the points that I was thinking about. So attack vectors. If you walk into most places and you unplug the device that's attached, you can stop somebody hijacking the port by implementing 802.1x. That's standard. Wireless just makes it easier. But if you've got a cable, you've still got packet sniffers. Everybody knows about Wi-Fi hijacking and session hijacking, all that sort of thing. But jamming is really quite a cool way of interrupting the way your operations. And one of the things I've never understood is why mobile phones in prisons are prevalent. Why don't they just put a jammer in? So I'm going to talk a little bit about home automation, because that's quite close to my heart. Anybody who's got the proprietary home automation systems that you'll see on Grand Designs and things like that, the lighting controls, they were wired historically. And there was miles of wiring in the ceiling to connect it all up. Building a passive house is one of my ambitions, and you really have to have some quite sophisticated technology to do that. But it's mostly about insulation. So here we have a Raspberry Pi on the left. That's the image I picked. The next object is a 433 megahertz transmitter. The little plug, the energy plug, is 433 megahertz. You can create a cloud at home with these things connected and control them with a Raspberry Pi and a piece of code. It's not that complicated. The bit at the bottom is the homegrown version of the transmitter in the middle at the top, but you can actually buy these components for a couple of dollars or a couple of pounds each. It's really quite straightforward. But I didn't fancy the breadboarded version. I just wanted something to plug into my Pi, preferably my steak Pi. So that's a picture that came from one of our demonstration kits. It's a fishbowl with environment monitoring on it. There's the van, thankfully turned up. It's a great picture, and I've actually been to the bottom of the Old Manor store. It's a fantastic view, and I sent him a picture looking back to where his van had been parked. So the connected cow, you might think this is an object of fun, but it's actually really serious. You can tell by the way the cow walks when it's coming into estrus. If you know when it's in estrus, the timing, you can determine whether you get bulls or heifers. And for farmers that are doing selective breeding, and an awful lot of farmers are doing selective breeding either to get bigger lambs, or there was a TV. Anybody seen This Farming Life? Well, it's a program about Scottish farmers, and they're spread all over the country. And one of them happens to be a friend of a friend at work, and he breeds Limousin cattle. and his bulls go for about up to £5,000 a head. So it's, you know, and that's how he gets a lot of the income for the farm. So it's serious money. It's really important sometimes. So that's a practical application. What's this all in? I love this photograph. This is one that was in the slide deck that I borrowed. If you get it wrong, it could be really disastrous. Not just from the point of view of losing data, but from reputational perspective. So I'm with Bob here. You know, having a consistent environment that you can deliver. Doesn't matter whose it is. So the governance is really essential, and these are some slides that my colleague sent me because we've been doing quite a lot of work in getting this ready. Standards, lack of standards or thereof, which is one of the things Bob mentioned. That little device on the right hand side looks like a RJ45 socket. It is, but it's actually a fully fledged HTTP server as well, and that's been on the market about 12 years. How do you keep that up to date? It's quite hard. So Bob was talking about, you know, we need security standards to manage access, authentication and accounting, because without that you don't know when the bad boy's running around causing chaos. And for all the widgets and things you want to connect, you have to have trust, you have to have security built in from the ground up. It's not an afterthought. If it's an afterthought, it's too late. The bad man's already done the damage and he's causing chaos. So a little bit of guidance. These are my opinions, I hasten to add. If you can control your lights, central heating remotely, then so in principle can somebody else. Gateways, you use the word gateway, that's a real old industrial control approach, because connecting dissimilar networks always needed a gateway of some description. And home hubs and devices like that are no different. You need a framework, and it doesn't matter which framework you choose a framework. My preference would be a framework that I've developed on a device that I understand what's on it, that I can control what goes in and out of it, so you can selectively control when it phones home or not, like the television. I've got an Android television, it's only had 3 software updates since Christmas. But that has to phone home in order to find out that it's got an update. So, final points, I think, you know, if you're expecting to get regular updates in order to tackle security problems, we are living in hope at the moment. It's optimism. It's a triumph of optimism over realism. So some key takeaways: solution design, solution implementation. Now I'm starting to sound like an architect, aren't I, which is my day job. Select the products carefully, vendor support and awareness. I like open source because multiple eyes mean you've actually got a better opportunity. But Microsoft are doing fantastic things with open source. SQL Server on Linux coming in the next 18 months or so. You can't make it an afterthought. It's critical. You don't want multiple gateways because each one of those is going to consume some power. I think that's just about it. So there's a question slide there, but we can take those later.
Thank you, Roger.
Your final speaker's not here.
The final speaker is not here because we're going to attempt to patch him in via Skype. So there will be a slight delay. Guys, do you want to have a quick drink? It may take a couple of minutes just to get everything sorted. So have a one, have a drink, then we come for a break, and we'll get the third speaker on.
Have your lappy back, Bob.
Are you going to do it from that laptop?
I was thinking...
Wait, before you unplug that, just 1 sec.
Yep. Maybe I should just send you the link.
Good.
Who do I email it to? The link.
Could we do it from that laptop?
Can we do it to your laptop, Bob?
Yeah, I think so. What is it, a Skype?
Or, I mean, we can do it from mine. This is...
Don't mind.
The other thing I'd recommend, but
Okay.
shit,
What? Oh,
that's what I was trying to avoid.
Bob. Apparently, what's the problem?
Just it's upsetting the live stream.
Oh, we've got a live stream, which apparently was connected to that laptop. Is that right?
It's fine. No, it's actually been okay.
So...
I'm going to suggest instead of Skype using peer.in, because you'll be straight in, it'll just work. And you just have to, you go to peer.in and then just send them the URL.
Okay.
And then it'll work from that. Don't worry about it.
So kill this. Leave it running. Your call.
What do you think?
I do it from that one, to be honest,
Okay.
because it's plugged in.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So
This has Skype and Skype for Business on it, so
so we're not doing Skype.
I recommend the peer.in.
This is just a URL that Bob needs to paste into his browser.
Basically, yeah.
Okay. So now I need to ask David.
So tell them to go to peer.in/IOT
Just a second. What is it again? www.
appear
Yeah.
/IOT EDI. Yeah. You just go off the browser.
there you go.
This is alright. Thanks very much. That's Bing. Because you're trying to get us to use Bing. You don't want to use Bing.
Speak for yourself.
What is this?
I haven't got Chrome on there.
Okay, you're not allowed Chrome? Oh, Edge. That's all.
I'll leave it with you.
Thanks.
You look like you've got it cracked.
You'll see him there. Tell him that I can see him here, but I can't see him there.
David, if you're listening through Periscope, I'm actually just leaving a message on your voicemail now. Can you pick up, because I'm just trying to call you, or give me a call back on 0777 sorry, this phone number. Sorry. My work number, so you don't know it by heart. But obviously you'll have a missed call from me. But give me a call back when and it's attached.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
I'm just going to
down here. flipping technology. It's like when you're on holiday, instead of enjoying experience, you're Instagramming or live streaming, or like, you're so, I suppose, concerned with, people sharing the experience. I mean, like the talks, whenever you're hosting an event, so often I'm not consuming the information of the speaker that's right in front of me speaking. It's such a shame, because I'm concentrating on the social stream, tweeting, pushing stuff to Facebook. It's quite difficult to do, to kind of juggle. You're wrong. The other thing that's really annoying is this is just such a bad design. I knew we shouldn't have got that template. Just looks wrong. The fact that I can't plug a microphone and the power. Just not what I probably have to slot it in the vent.
It's working. We just need to see if we get a bit more application is the only thing.
Sure. Pick my slides.
If you do a screen share on Ethereum, it will just come up on the.
That crashed my browser. Can you hear me okay? No. Base anyway.
The audio straight input. Okay, anything else in And is he moving? Yeah. I thought it's frozen.
Alright, David. Come on, chop chop, let's get cracking.
Oh, perfect.
You see what you've done? There we are. And then I will now lock it again.
How's it going?
Alright, everyone ready? Let's do it! Alright. Okay, so, were the beers chilled? Have they had time to chill? In fact, can someone grab me a beer? Tim, can you get me a cider? Please. Sponsor. Nautilus Beam 2C text input for smartwatches. I use it actually, it's a great app, I promise you, it's brilliant. It's really, really handy. Because you know what, sometimes you don't want to use voice, okay, Google or Siri. You're in a busy environment, noisy. Privacy issues, again, chatting to your devices. You get to set it down there, that's fine. So thank you so much for, once again, for the to 2C for sponsoring the event. Text input for tiny screens. Okay. So, we did this a couple of events ago. I don't know if you guys were here for that, but I did my talk via Skype, and well, in this case, it's not Skype, is it? We're using a different app. What are we using, Alan?
Appearing.
Appearing, there you go. And it worked pretty well, and it just means that we can gain access to a broader spectrum of speakers who are not necessarily able to make it to Edinburgh to do a talk. And in this case, we have David Rogers from Copperhorse Solutions, who I think you're in Oxford, is that right? Can you hear me?
No, I'm in deepest, darkest Wales, actually.
You're in Wales? What are you doing in Wales? Oh my goodness. Okay.
Don't ask.
On a covert mission. So yeah, so David's our next speaker, and I'll leave it to you. Over to you. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks for inviting me to speak tonight. I'm afraid I don't have any beer, so please drink one for me. I've got water here, unfortunately. So yeah, I'd love to be in Edinburgh tonight. I'm sorry, I've just come back from the States, so it was a pretty tough call to get up to Edinburgh tonight too. So I've already uploaded a copy of this video and well, a slightly different version of this video, obviously, to YouTube and also to SlideShare. So if you want to follow the slides, I've put the links. I've sent the links to Simon. And you can follow them on SlideShare. I'll try to put them on the screen at the same time. I did manage to follow some of the other talks before this at just a few minutes, and there seems to be a lot of sense being talked, which is good. I'm going to talk about IoT security and privacy. That's what my company primarily does. I chair the device security group of the Gearsome Association. I also sit on the executive board of the IoT Security Foundation, and I'm co-chair of the W3C's hardware security group. And I was in Boston actually the past 2 days, where we were talking with Tim Berners-Lee and Bruce Schneier, who's a big security specialist, about how do we secure the web of things and the internet of things in the future. And it is a pretty tough issue. In the States, just last month, the Director of National Intelligence said that integrity and data modification were going to be some of the biggest cyber attacks, and that was specifically highest levels of government, as well as in industry, people are significantly concerned about this topic. If I just switch over, you don't need to see my face anymore. I'll switch the slides. I hope this will work. Can you all see the screen okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so who's connected to the future internet? Well, maybe you won't know. It might not be a fridge talking to you, but it might be some kind of advanced AI that's pretending to be a person. That's probably a different topic, but we simply don't know. The internet is a complete transformation now. It's undergoing, and you know the web too. So the web was essentially a mechanism for accessing documentation, and now it's going to be a mechanism for accessing physical objects in some way. And we've been steadily creeping towards this for a few years now. But not just physical objects or technical devices. On the Internet of Things, obviously nobody knows you're a dog, an actual dog connected with sensors perhaps. Again, this is highlighting that even animals, as the previous speaker mentioned, will be connected. And from a human perspective, connected medical devices are already becoming an issue. Not necessarily directly connected to the internet, but connected insulin pumps, for example, have been a big source of concern for people. In fact, that the guy who discovered a flaw in a connected insulin pump is being told not to use it himself because he will become a target. So connected medical devices and connected wearables are a significant concern from an attack perspective.
So we're transforming things, and the previous speaker mentioned about connecting his home. We have to rethink entirely what we consider to be home security. So the perimeter of the house is sort of seeping outwards wirelessly, and traditional solutions and traditional issues are going away. So from a privacy perspective, I've got a colleague who is a privacy specialist, and he talks about the sort of creeping invasion of the home from all of these devices. And he now spends his time talking about the right to intimacy and the right to solitude, things that we would never really have thought about inside our own homes that we would have to consider. That's the sort of sanctuary that we seek, but actually it's being breached quite rapidly by these connected devices. So a lot of the companies that are connecting these devices don't have a clue what they're doing. And in fact, I think most of those companies should be called tools, because you know they're jumping into this and they're not even bothering to think about security. Security isn't even an afterthought. They don't care. And this is a big concern for the mobile phone world and for the security research world, because we've undergone a significant attack over the years, and we've built up a lot of security mechanisms that help protect consumers and help protect against attack. The mobile network, for example, could come under attack from a lot of these rogue connected devices if they're not secured correctly. So mobile operators are particularly concerned about devices that are not secure. When you put things in your home, who are you opening up access to? So a lot of webcams connect over the internet, and the instructions will encourage you to essentially open up ports and essentially give access to anybody. And there have been some examples in the media where baby monitors have been opened up, and people have been talking to the children through the baby monitor. Now, that's a very good Daily Mail story, and obviously that hits the media straight away. But it's a combination of things. Sometimes it may be that the product itself was substandard, and that it will never get software updates. It's always got some kind of open access. Even the authentic products. So in this case, it was a false account, default password and username very well known, and can be accessed to a lot of tools. There's one called Showdown, for example, that can get access to IP cameras. So, but the user has a responsibility too, but the fact is that most users aren't educated in security and really probably shouldn't be. They have an expectation that the product is secure by default, and they will follow the instructions of the manufacturer. So, you know, the sanctuary of the home is really being breached in cases like this, and it really scares people. So that actually causes an adoption problem in that consumers are too scared to buy connected cameras and also connected products because they think they will be hacked. I'll give you some examples here. So this is the LifeX light bulb. This is an interesting story because there was an FCC committee that was set up to look at the Internet of Things, and LifeX was talked about. And on the panel they said, well, you know, what can you do with LifeX? You can maybe turn the light on and off and just annoy somebody who's trying to induce some kind of epileptic fit or something. Using what's called a pivot attack, so that the real objective is something else entirely. So in these cases, it's extracting the home Wi-Fi password. The same with a product called Ring. This is on sale in the States and in the UK. This is attached to the front of your house. So not only can you extract the Wi-Fi password, you don't even have to do it remotely. You can actually just physically go and pick the device up and take it away and extract the password. So what these product designers think that this is going to happen, or that a burglar or a remote attacker is going to here's another example. So from Argos. So I should explain some of this, that basically a couple of weeks ago we were tasked with attacking the smart home, and we were only to buy products from Argos, B&Q, Berry, just high street stores. So we picked up this one. This is £260. It's reduced at the moment. I advise you not to buy it at all. It is a home alarm system that's a cheap solution, so it includes batteries, and it allows people to sort of retrofit something quite quickly. The problem is that there's a video on YouTube that tells you how to break into the house, and you can disable this thing in a couple of seconds. So, for example, the front of that box can easily be removed. The tamper sensor isn't very good, and there is literally an off switch in there, or you could just flip out the batteries. The same with the control panel. And we were showing people this and repeatedly showing this. You know, this product should not be on sale, but it still continues to be sold. You can have a look at it in the Argos catalog now. And it's supposed to be a wireless alarm, but having removed the batteries, there's no way that SIM card can communicate whatsoever. It's astonishing that these companies are supposedly selling security products, yet they know nothing about security, and they're really duping consumers. I'm sure you've all heard about Samsung SmartThings. So just last month there was some flaws highlighted within the Zigbee specification. I just saw you learning about Zigbee just now. And the researcher even was able to open locks by decrypting the signals on the Zigbee network. There's a lot of other flaws that Zigbee is vulnerable to. If you've heard about jamming, you can insecurely rejoin a network, so you can basically join your network without being authorized. There's also a lot of other issues with Samsung SmartThings. For example, if you remove the network cable, so say I'm a burglar in your house, I remove the network cable, that system will not communicate for 10 minutes. It won't tell the user that there's anything wrong. None of the endpoint devices or sensors will collect any information to say of any of the events that were going on at the time. And then I can just plug the network cable back in, and essentially that 10 minutes just didn't happen. The user is none the wiser. This is the same for various webcams as well. If you, I won't say the name of them, but if you turn off a particular type of webcam, so you flip the power,
get is when they try to connect to the webcam, they just get a rotating symbol, and it looks like there's some kind of network issue. But what should happen is that there should be some notification that there was a power outage afterwards, but that doesn't happen. So it's becoming quite easy to burgle homes, I think, with the smart device connected. So let's move on to other things in the smart home. So smart TVs, well, a lot of them have now got webcams, although I noticed the latest generation seems to be phasing webcams out, and Skype have removed support for their TV product as well. So we'll see how long that lasts, but I've been to people's houses where they've got fantastic shiny silver TVs with a big black bit of insulation tape over the webcam. So people are genuinely scared about this stuff. They don't like the idea that somebody could be watching them and they don't know about it. There's been a lot of scare stories in the media. There's some scare stories around voice control. So nearly all of the Samsung products now have voice control. There was an issue here, so what happens if you search the web, it has some pre-installed voice commands in the device, but if you search for something unusual, it will go off to a company called Nuance, do all of the processing in the cloud, and then come back with what it thought you said. The problem was that Samsung didn't encrypt this at all. They didn't use HTTPS, so I could actually see any of the commands that they're going across the internet. Now, why I don't think this is a big issue for normal users, because I don't think there's a large body of people who are using voice commands on their TV. I do think it's a kind of concern, and it's an indicator that these companies are not taking their security seriously. You should not be producing a product in 2016 that cannot create an encrypted connection to the internet. Even your pets are connected now, potentially. So this is from 2014 at DEFCON. Guy showed War Kitten, the denial of service dog. Basically, he attached hacking equipment to these animals and sent them off into people's gardens and gathered Wi-Fi information. And so the perimeter of the home is being breached in many different ways. We've also demonstrated actually landing drones on people's house roofs. Nobody is securing the vertical perimeter above their house, but at 400 feet you could have a antenna and actually start to disrupt the wireless connections in a home pretty easily. We've shown that using simple attack tools like Wi-Fi Pineapple to de-authenticate devices from Wi-Fi networks and to attack them. So every new home is going to have a smart meter. Sadly, your smart meter will give away a lot about what you're doing. So there were some German researchers who showed that they could even show what film you were watching based on the power consumption of your TV. So your power company will know a lot about you if you have a smart meter, and actually to a large degree if you don't. So the sanctity of the home is not what you think it is. That's just a kind of taster. So there are lots and lots of other devices. The same friend who had the insulation tape over his TV told me about his connected thermostats in his radiator, and each of the rooms had a thermostat in, and he was in a pub with me and he said, look, the temperature's gone up in the bathroom, my wife's in the bath. And that's quite concerning from a privacy perspective, because seemingly innocuous data can be used to infer actions and things that people are doing that would relate to crime information. So another word on counterfeit devices. So before this demonstration, I went ahead and bought a substandard device from Amazon. This is it says Patch Me on the front of it, which I think they meant Page Me. Yeah, for £9, I can get a smartwatch that connects over Bluetooth and does everything that the Apple Watch does. Sadly, it probably also sends my data off to Chinese IP addresses. As one company found out in the US a couple of weeks ago. The sheer number of permissions this needs to operate means that even credit card numbers that you might enter on the device's LCD could be captured quite easily. So you should steer well clear of these kind of products, that they will only bring you pain. But sadly, a lot of people are buying them, particularly cheap webcams, for example. In the near future, so from next week, I believe, Amazon Echo will go on sale in the States. It'll come to the UK shortly after. So this will be able to control IoT products and devices, as well as things like Spotify. There will be a number of commands that this responds to. It will always be listening to you. So you're introducing a microphone into your house, and that's a concern if you don't get it right. So I've heard that people are deliberately getting messages played on the radio to activate the device. And one of the keywords apparently is disarm. So Alexa disarm. If this is played back, it will probably shut down your product. And this actually happened on the Xbox One a few years ago. So there was a celebrity on Xbox advert, and he said Xbox on, and all of the Xboxes that were in the rooms of the people watching this advert turned on. So you're not thinking through the implications of some of this technology, and if they can simply be defeated by a simple replay attack or simulation of audio, that's certainly a concern for me. So what about software updates? So you would expect that software updates come down quickly, but it's been very difficult for us to do that in the mobile industry for a lot of different reasons. But what's happening with the connected products is that the designers are not actually thinking that this is connected to something physical. So in the Nest case, just before they were acquired by Google, this guy tweeted them, and basically in the middle of January, the Nest device shut down entirely to do its software upgrade, didn't maintain that basic minimum service of keeping the thermostat going and on, and burst all his pipes in his house. This kind of stuff is happening with a lot of IoT products, and they're not being designed for what are essentially safety critical and in some cases life-preserving devices. So it's clear that we will need some kind of regulation around this, because we can't continue with this sort of situation. There are lots of other issues around software updates, like end of life, and when do software updates stop being provided, and how do we deal with legacy? But that's a completely different talk, and I could talk to you for ages about that. But it's very, very difficult. So another thing to think about is dark patterns. So where companies get you to do things that you probably really shouldn't do. One example of this is in privacy policies. So on the smart TV, I've got to read through 221 pages that Samsung tells me that I really need to read through, plus the nuanced privacy policy, plus all the other general terms and conditions. But what they do is they actually provide me with a convenient accept all button before I've read anything. And what they're doing is deferring all that liability to me. And even if I do want to not agree to some of those terms, I can't, because they'll basically just not let me access the technology. This really needs to change, and this manipulation of human beings is a real concern. And what we're doing is giving away all of our data to these companies, and they're basically saying, well, you agree, but we didn't really have a choice. So I'm sure that some of the other speakers have spoken about industrial IoT and some of the issues around that. There's a real big issue around fraud and some of the cyber physical concerns around this. It's not trivial by any means. I've only talked to you about some of the smart home issues, but in other areas in industrial IoT and connected agriculture, these concerns are exactly the same. The technologies are exactly the same. The insecurity is exactly the same. So in the automotive realm, we've already seen static street signs being attacked regularly. There's no reason to think that that's not going to happen for connected infrastructure. So vehicle to infrastructure, infrastructure to vehicle, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to pedestrian. All of these are new attack vectors, and some of the issues, if I close the lanes or open the lanes in opposing directions, who's going to be able to detect that? Is anybody going to find that an issue or not? These are real safety concerns. So, as I mentioned at the start, I'm on the executive board of the IOT Security Foundation. If you're interested in that activity, then please feel free to email me or go to the foundation website. We're going to try and put guidelines up for developers, also guidelines up for manufacturers and operators of IoT solutions. So we are trying to address this problem in other standards bodies too. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the drinks afterwards. And
we're actually going to do a Q&A session.
YouTube.
Right. So what we're going to round of applause. So David, can you hang around for a bit?
Yeah, sure.
Do you mind being on the big screen while we pull a chair? Bob, Roger, are you still here? Come to the front and grab a chair, the usual format. In the industry, in that context, where they love complexity, they thrive on complexity. The more gadgets, the more features, the better. There is this, I suppose, there's always been a temptation to add too many bells and whistles for what the actual end user wants. And I think this gender bias is a problem, and not having a more inclusive, I suppose, a process. And that may be trickling down into the way IoT connected products are being designed within the consumer context specifically.
Yeah, making things easy to use is actually hard. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. Designing user interfaces is something I was doing about 35 years ago, and it's not easy. If there's something going wrong, it wants to be big and red. And then somebody pays attention. They pay a lot of attention to user interfaces in the airline industry to keep pilots alert as to what's happening. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's another part to it as well, which is the understanding the continued almost service that you need. And I'll give an example. So smart TVs, if you go now and buy any brand, it doesn't matter. They will continue to upgrade the firmware on that TV for about 18 months. The life of a smart TV in most people's homes is somewhere like 6-7 years. So on almost all TVs that you can buy that are internet enabled, you have a built-in 4.5-year window when you probably are going to be vulnerable to known things. And that's because there's an economic hit. If you bring out a new TV every 4 months for the trade shows, the cost of keeping the firmware for that number of models becomes uneconomic. But the economics therefore leave people vulnerable. And I think it's that type of thinking that needs to actually be brought through to consumers so they can think more about how that works. I think we have a question, Simon.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
You could say it all comes back down to branding now, would you say? Because the onus should shift from the consumer, the user, who invest their faith in certain products. You could say it's applied to Apple with their kind of battles in the States now with the FBI unlocking phones. And I have more respect for Apple for some of their actions, but they're kind of, you could say they've got our interests at heart. And companies now in the future would maybe give their name as part of their branding to be internet secure, so the Internet of Things that they produce will have these.
Thank you for that point, because that was actually my next question. Segueing the debate in terms of which side of the fence are you on? Do you feel that the government should have access under certain circumstances to data that belongs to citizens if they feel that there's a potential threat? Or should OEMs take the side of the consumer and lock even government agents out of our personal data? What's the consensus within the room? Can I just, before I put this, who is in favor of what, is everyone aware, by the way, of what's going on in the Apple versus FBI, US government debate? Okay, well, essentially, for those that don't know, there is an alleged terrorist that the US government wants to have data that's actually stored within an Apple product. I'm sorry? Okay, proven terror, but if you put alleged in front of anything, it kind of gets you in the clear. And the bottom line is they want to unlock the phone, and Apple is saying, well, if we give you, US government, a back door, that can be exploited by not just you, but everyone potentially. So we're not going to put that back door in, and we're not going to start now, and therefore this is just an exception, an exceptional case, and you need to prosecute without the need to get access to this phone. And so there's this tussle that's going on, and it's going to go all the way to, I think, the Supreme Court. Now, who's in favor of which side? Do you think the government should have a right under these circumstances to access data?
But now the FBI has cracked the Apple related issues. Now it's done. They went to the court and said they don't need the help of Apple now.
To do it.
Because they've got the help from somebody else. Which begs the question, if the NSA couldn't do it, who could? Who's got enough money?
Well, that's a very good question. But I think what I'm asking is in terms of the sentiment, which side do you fall? Do you think that all our information should be protected regardless? Are you on the side of the consumer, or are you on the side of the government?
It's not a clear cut, because the FBI have taken attempt to retrieve the data, otherwise the data would erase itself. Apple hasn't told anybody whether they are able to bypass their own system or not. They wouldn't tell anybody that information. And what the FBI was saying to them, if you do not have a back door, because their argument was, if you have a back door, we can access it, and the hacker will access it. But they haven't admitted yet whether they are able to access it themselves or not. So the FBI came in with a parallel proposal for them to build a system whereby it is an upgrade, and they provide them with a backdoor so they can bombard it with many combination numbers and not restricted to the before traces. But the whole debate, this is an alleged terrorist. I think Apple is doing it not for the consumer side, but for the commercial profit. This is a terrorist who killed his colleagues. It's a clear cut. Doesn't matter what our intention is. And the FBI, as elected government by the people, despite what we think of them, should be able to decode this information and get the data they need to pursue the other culprit. Simply, you're encouraging a criminal to buy a product they know they are secure. So you're encouraging consumers who are a criminal And you're
Yeah, but the vast majority of consumers are not criminals. This is the point. So you're almost throwing the baby out with the bathwater by not protecting the average Joe. This is you know, an interesting debate. I knew it was going to be a hot topic, and embrace it. Just a second, David, do you chime in if you've got a point of view on this, which I'm sure you do.
Yeah, so I think that I've written a blog on this actually. If you have a look on security.org, you can see it. The problem is this is a societal issue that needs to be solved. It's being pushed as a technical issue, and actually we don't have a clean technical solution for this. Society does demand that justice is served, and often in many cases now the police are presented with a body and a phone that is entirely locked. There's no paper diaries anymore or any pocket litter that people have. So it's very difficult to do digital investigations. So what you have is this kind of game going on where we as the mobile phone industry secure a product to the best of our ability, and then private forensic companies are selling solutions to law enforcement. They're essentially using cracks and hacks, as you've seen with the alleged Celebrate assistant in the FBI case. So the fact is we need a better solution, and the reason that the All Writs Act is being used is because this needs to be forced as a case to create new law, just as in the case with Steve Gold in the UK with the Computer Misuse Act. They didn't have the Computer Misuse Act, and that case forced the existence of that, and that's what's happening now. But from a technical standpoint, it's not possible currently to have entirely secure smartphones that are encrypted and to give law enforcement legitimate access, because you have to give that access to other countries too that we might not agree with. So then, from a technology point of view, we need to come up with a better solution. And whether that better solution is some kind of mass multi-party key escrow scheme, where you have a solid jury that by majority can get access to that device, maybe that's one way. But currently we don't have that at all. And this case is particularly messy. And clearly Apple are obviously doing this for PR purposes as much as anything else.
Okay, interesting. So, again, staying on the topic of privacy, do you think that it's possible to have, you know, when you buy a food product, you go into your local supermarket and you can see the ingredients, you can see the sugar content, you can see the fat content. Essentially, is this product going to do me any harm nutritionally? Do you think there's the equivalent for IoT devices where you'll have a kind of a kite mark or some kind of standard where there'll be like an ingredient labeling system to say, okay, this is the data that we're taking. This is where it's stored. This is how we use it. So it's very, very clear, almost like a traffic light system, you know, red light. This is a lot of personal data we're taking, but you know, red light, but be rest assured that it's encrypted, it's safe, it's anonymized, blah, 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 and it's for your own benefit, because ultimately it's medical intelligence and insights that's going to be, you know, feedback into the system and improve medical research and your welfare, and so on and so forth. Do you know what I mean? Is that conceivable or is that naive?
But again, that the public needs to be engaged and they need to be taught about these things, because this is more technical.
But simplify. You could say that as a nutritionist. Oh, the average person doesn't know the difference between, you know, there are different types of fat. There are good fats and bad fats, and there's good cholesterol, high density cholesterol, low density cholesterol. One's good for you, one's bad for you. So there's no point even attempting to put, you know, food labeling, labeling on food products. Dr. Tim, excuse me just a second. You've had
what you're saying is on the food, it's boiled down to a traffic light system of 3, and pretty much I would imagine most consumers ignore the details.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's the point that Dave was making. It's dark patterns. You're forced into a situation. In fact, there is a documentary that I watched on Netflix some months ago called Terms and Conditions Apply, and it was just you know, they did the research. They went through the small print because, you know, they're trained professionals. But the average person, of course, is not going to go through the small print. And they worked out, and I'm just going to make up a number, okay, because I can't honestly remember. But it was something like, if we actually did read through the terms and conditions that each month we agree to, it would take us 1 entire week of every month reading through T's and C's. It's inconceivable. It's not possible. So we are being hoodwinked or manipulated or forced, if you're being very you know, aggressive, into agreeing to these terms. Dark patterns, is that the right terminology? We lost David. Okay, Tim. He can interact here through the live stream on Periscope or YouTube. Tim, you have a question?
No, it's just about the...
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I think what you're saying is that you're actually proposing that the consumer be relieved of that judgment burden, at least to an extent, by having an authoritative and knowledgeable body make the assessment in detail and then come up with some sort of...
Is that how it works in the food industry? I don't actually know. I mean, is that optional? I think that's actually an opt-in, because a lot of food manufacturers choose not to. That's kind of, it's one of those things where, you know, I think there's a government industry or the government has said, look, you need to get your act together, get your house in order, because if you don't, there will be ramifications, and that means nanny state stepping in, so you need to police yourself. So I think it's an optional scheme, and it's an attempt to do the right thing.
Well,
and
I was actually going to use that exact phrase.
Okay.
Philosophically doing the right thing is the right way to go.
Do no evil. Okay. Great.
And you've got, I mean, I touched on standards, and I think that's absolutely so. Some kind of kite mark, which is another phrase I was thinking of just before you said it. It boils down to trust.
Which is branding.
Which
again,
is
it's association with a brand you trust versus one of these dodgy products that was that one can purchase, and you're just thinking, whoa, I have no idea. There could be malware which has been flashed into the product at manufacture. You just, because you don't know where the product has actually come from, and that is entirely possible. And in fact, I'm going off base a little bit, but ZTC, a Chinese OEM, have been essentially banned from selling their consumer products in the United States, or at least heavily limited, because they were involved with something the United States were not happy about, and it might actually have been trading electronic goods with countries that have been blacklisted. So it might be more on the sort of aerospace and defense side of things that they're not happy about. But the bottom line is, there is, I think, a lot of paranoia, isn't there, about American products going to China and Chinese products going to America, in terms of what is actually on board these chips that we're installing on strategically important government, devices, electronic devices, networking components, smart home devices, smart city devices. Who's tracking this data? Where's it ending up, and what is it being used for? I mean, what is Microsoft doing in that area? Obviously, when you buy Microsoft product, it's the same old thing. You're buying into the trust that Microsoft elicits when you install software, approved software on your computer, versus something that's...
So there's two bits from the last conversation. I'll touch on both. The first is around what information do you give to a user of something about what they have just signed up to. And the best practice, and even the example that they put up about a very shoddy piece of work, there was one bit of good practice there, because it actually did give a checklist to say this device is going to use all these features. And probably you wouldn't ever want to say yes to that, but that is actually good practice, because then the consumer can make an informed decision about the utility of that. So they may go, okay, I don't mind it accessing my location and the following details because of the utility I get out of a £4 device. And frankly, every time any of us in the room use LinkedIn or Facebook or Amazon, you are doing the same, because actually the cookies you sign up to when you sign up to those services access all sort of your data, and I assume being a knowledgeable audience, that you're all making that economic, personal decision that the utility of the service equals the data you're given, I assume. The second part is really even more interesting, which is about what is the virtue of your supply chain. Because actually the supply chain issues come into the Internet of Things as well. For us, we are incredibly careful about our supply chain. We demand of our suppliers that we can see objectively and quite overtly their level of security, because supply chain is such a risk. The second part of that is that that enables us then to give better trust to the people who use our services, whether they're paid for or free. And there have been some very well publicised cases, and I won't go into them in any detail, of equipment in a range of sectors produced from a range of countries that does more than it says on the tin for purposes of national benefit, or usually. So both of those actually are linked, because in the Internet of Things, let's talk about medical devices. There's a really good article identifying the number of third-party components in a range of medical devices, ranging from very simple blood transfusion pumps through to X-ray machines, and the number of third-party components in those is phenomenal. And again, when you're actually trying to say, I am happy with the data that device is given, you really can't do that unless you know the provenance of all the key bits of hardware and software that drive that device. And in more complex, even in simple devices, it's difficult. In more complex devices, it's frankly almost impossible.
Yeah, so the part of this is about regulation and enforcing or reinforcing existing regulatory bodies to deal with IoT. So in the States, for example, the FDA would cover medical devices, but they're not really set up at the moment to do that. In the UK, we don't really have that much, and I don't see that there's an appetite to have regulation. But it's clear that it's going to be necessary. But we have some bigger issues, actually. Everyone kind of leaps to these sort of staggering large scenarios like that. Data theft by companies is a big issue, and users need to be able to introspect data leaving their homes, for example. But simple measures that are not being implemented, security measures that are standardized, you can buy the components for, they're just not being implemented. We need a minimum set of standards to say, you should not be able to sell a product in the UK if it doesn't meet these minimum standards from a product security perspective.
I think there have been some people recently pushing for a kite mark standard, and the government is just saying, look, it's just not our problem. Or, I mean, is anyone aware of this recent furore that's been going on social media? And there was a conference recently, and some leading luminary in the kind of IoT space has been saying we need this kind of government-enforced kite mark for connected products. And the department within the government who normally deals with these sort of standards is just kind of just saying, look, it's not our problem.
There's one thing certain to happen if you insist, if that level of management is put on. The price will go up from $4 to $40 per device, and the market, such as it stands, will evaporate.
Will die. It will be held back, certainly.
Also, I maybe
the thing is as well, on that front, when we're talking about IoT, we're going beyond geographic boundaries. So you can't say what's valid legislation in the UK, that's not going to fit other places, and trying to find middle ground is incredibly difficult.
And that's why W3C, the organisation that Dave's a representative on for this, is so important, because the standards bodies, the global standards bodies, are ultimately where some of this needs to come from. Even if it's as simple as saying, you open a session, you run it over some kind of HTTPS SSL connection, both directions. Yeah, it's not difficult. We were having a conversation while we were waiting for you to set it up. It's not simple. It's really hard. And it's not something that's going to be solved overnight. The
Right.
early adopters might get burnt.
I think if you look at the complexity of actually taking a hardware product to market, they say hardware is hard compared to software and apps and so on, because it really is. You know, there's multiple layers of complexity in terms of getting a product prototyped, manufactured, and getting it to market. I mean, the first step is just finding the right architecture that's going to fulfill the needs of the end user. So looking at the companies, usually they're based in China, that actually manufacture the system on the chip. Now, there are companies like Intel and others who now they're called they're like support packages. You know, their companies will actually support the chip, the system on a chip. So this is the hardware manufacturer, OEM, who's going through this process. Then there's data that's going to be accumulated by that device. That's going to need to be stored on the cloud. Now, Amazon are entering that space. Google recently said that they're going to be replicated. AWS are doing a kind of IOT dedicated on-demand cloud system. You've got Lings, the Thing Network, ThingWorks. There are an increasing amount of cloud hosting companies. Now, what level of expertise do they have in the security domain? Interesting, open question. Then you've got the ODMs, then you've got the OEMs, and then the distributors.
May have issued some security guidelines, a big set that we can download them from the site. So what a lot of us are talking about is a self-declaration scheme.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention Azure, Microsoft Azure, of course, in terms of IoT hosting solutions.
but you know, you can't, when you get into the commercial sector, you cannot get away from the fact that there's a requirement for due diligence from the user. Not all cloud providers are the same. Not all cloud security is the same, and never will be, because there will be clouds designed for different economies, different markets in different parts of the world. And there is a requirement for users to be clear about what their security model looks like, and then to actually assess against the security model. I'm frankly, personally, reasonably lukewarm on the standards side, and I'll give you a couple of reasons why. The first is, I've done some standards body work in the past and I bear the scars. Standards bodies, and they sort of have to be really slow, because it is like trying to produce a very detailed technical standard with a very large number of people in a room representing all sorts of different sectors and economies and global countries who have to agree. So what you tend to end up with is something that is dumbed down or to a lowest denominator and tends to come out about 4 years after it's needed, when the technology has probably moved on. The other part of it is there are regulators who will use the standards as then it's a binary. Either does it meet that standard or not. And when we're talking about the type of things we're talking about today, remember what I said, the security model has to be coherent between the device, the network, and the back end. So it isn't just a question of, is this bit of it right? It's how are you using that? How are you implementing it? Because you can take an insecure device and run it in an incredibly secure implementation if you put mitigations in place on the network or at the back end. Conversely, you can have a great secured device and your network is insecure, well, you're still vulnerable. So there's a danger, I think, in this space, which is more complex, that actually sometimes they can be giving a false air of security or actually preventing the development of technology. Now, having said that, I do think there is a place, but I think that there is a place, it's not the only answer.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up fairly soon. Are there any questions from the floor?
Well, with regards to security and public cloud providers, one of the ways that security is assured is with ISO standards. There are various ISO standards, and cloud providers are not obliged to comply to any of them. It's completely optional, however, customers look for it. So if they do comply with certain standards, they can advertise that, and some customers will choose to seek business with them because they comply to those. And that same methodology could be applied to network-connected devices, like Internet of Things devices, without necessarily forcing manufacturers to implement these standards, but ones that do might see greater sales. Likewise, with European trade agreements, if you want to regulate products coming into the UK, being a little bit broader sweeping and say, how about into the EU? Because there's trade agreements within the EU, it would be very difficult to say a product made in Germany or France or wherever in the EU, to stop that from coming to the UK is probably more difficult than to stop something from China or Pakistan or wherever from coming into the EU.
It's interesting. It's a really good point. I mean, the ISO standards are great. I mean, I think, you know, certainly it's a good benchmark. We produce every month a spreadsheet of where all our products and services are in relation to, and I'm not joking, there are probably 40 standards that range from different international standards to sector specific. So if you're in the US, there's the HIPAA standard for health, there's the FSI standard for financial sector, and we have to certify all of our products against all of these, and we do it every month. And it takes us an incredible amount of time because people everywhere say, are you HIPAA compliant or whatever it is? And you have to have an answer to it. The problem is it's so complex. My personal view is I'm not actually quite sure what the value is because I'm not really sure how I advise people which are the standards you really should look for and which, well, no, I won't say it because we're being recorded, which are some of the standards that frankly really are worth nothing other than you probably get a certificate that you can put up somewhere at your corporate headquarters. Because again, they're not all as valuable as others.
Certainly. I've noticed Google did something in the last few days with their email service where it has a new kind of check-in of the senders to see if they're trusted or authenticated in some way. They just went live with this in the last few days. So I'm not sure exactly what actually the checking is, but they're trying to verify the source of emails sent. Not just about encryption of emails, it's now actually verifying where it came from as a trusted sender. That's quite interesting. So they implemented encryption as standard for their emails a while back, and now they're kind of pushing that a bit further by verifying the sources of the emails. And that's I think very nice, the direction they're going there.
There's a lot of machine learning starting to be incorporated into security. So for example, we will now tell you if you're an enterprise customer, if you're getting logins from places that physically cannot be done within a timescale. You know, there's an awful lot now of predictive analytics that we're able to tell people to alert people that they've got a problem. For example, you know, we're picking them up in botnet takedowns, and we and the rest of the industry as well are doing this to basically try and beef up the different levels of security. But I come back to, you know, you have to have a coherent security model across all parts of the spectrum, and that's where, unfortunately, there's still a lot falling down.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for everyone who chose to take the time out to join us today. And of course to our speakers. So that's Robert Hayes from Microsoft, Roger Whiteley from Fujitsu, and David Rogers from Copperhorse Solutions. And to our sponsor, Nautilus Beam Limited, 2C app, text on your smartwatch. Thank you very, very much indeed. We'll leave it there. Thank you.